And then that brings us to the highlight of the day, close reading. And close reading encompasses, in my mind, all of the shifts for ELA in literacy. It's kind of like the culmination of everything that we've highlighted today and actually put it into some direct practice. We're going to use the Gettysburg Address, but before we get started, that is in your packet. Before we get started, you're going to see slow, concentrated, deliberate. The purpose is not reading fluency here. This is independent reading, which would be the ultimate goal. But initially, teachers are going to have to model this over and over and over again for students until they begin to internalize this process. Slow, concentrated, deliberate. There's that immersion into the craft of the author. So think of that shift number 2, where the expectation is the student really becomes the expert in that field. Here, the person gets inside the head of the author. All right? Author's purpose is something that's been around a long time. This is author's purpose, but really at a much deeper level. Sometimes this is also referred to, as I travel around, some districts are referring to it as deep reading. So if you see deep or close reading, it's the same thing. Devotion to evidence of the text, always looking back into the text for the answers. It postpones the building of background knowledge, and this is going to be what is very difficult for teachers in the field now. When I went for some training this summer, that to me, that building of background knowledge really is key. Before students begin a new topic, that old KWL strategy, very important, and it still is. But when a student comes to a complex piece of text, like if they're sitting down for the state assessments, the teacher is not there building that background knowledge before they read that piece. So that is why it postpones the building of background knowledge. Everyone begins on the same playing field. After the first stages of close reading are put into place, then background knowledge has a role. The text speaks for itself. Reading Like a Detective is based on the work of David Coleman. He's one of the authors of the Common Core. And it means to focus on the 4 corners of the text. Now, the 4 corners of the text means the paper. You see there's 4 corners here? Just this. Notice there's not a lot of charts or graphs or pictures. It's just the words. So the reader is forced into the text. And certainly on the state assessments, even now, there are very few pictures, if any. So this models what students will encounter on the state assessments. This close reading, also you can find David Coleman's work in Appendix A of the Common Core. So we're going to do President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. We won't have time to do all of it, but we certainly will do part of it so you'll have an understanding of what's involved with that. So with close reading, the very first step is the student reads the text on their own. Now, with close reading, as students begin to understand what this is all about, when I, the teacher, say, this is a close reading exercise, they automatically know this is challenging text. They automatically know, okay, I need to use a different strategy to attack this text. The very first step is to read the text to yourself. And students know there'll be words they don't know. Students know they're not going to understand everything, but the idea is to read through the piece of text. So right now I would like you just very, I'm going to say quickly for the sake of time, but that's not what you would say to the students. You would ask them to read through the text, and it's, you know, this close, deliberate reading. And then, after the students read the text on their own, and you can chunk this depending on your class. You chunk it. You don't have to have them read the whole thing all at once. The teacher reads the text aloud to the students a second time. And I'm going to focus in on just the very first paragraph, which is really just one long sentence. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, you're going to see score was underlined. Score was underlined, the definition given over on the right-hand side. It was considered a tier 3 word by David Coleman, who did this close reading, the author of the Common Core, because even though we see the word score in music and in sports today, that meaning we don't see anymore. We don't use the word score to mean 20. So that was considered to be a technical piece, and there are other words that are underlined throughout there where the meaning is given on the right-hand side. As a teacher, you would do the same thing. The words that have squiggly lines under them are what David Coleman considered to be academic vocabulary words. This lesson is designed for 8th or 9th graders on the Gettysburg Address, okay? So that's using his professional judgment would have been academic vocabulary words. But before we get started going into depth with the first paragraph, I want to give you some non-examples of text-based questions. So, one non-example would be, what was this new nation called? All the students know the answer to this in 8th and 9th grade, but it's not a text-based question because the answer is not written in that first paragraph. Another non-example would be, who is Lincoln referring to when he says, all men? Now, most students would be able to answer that, but the who is not written out in that first paragraph. Now I'm going to give you some text-based examples. And these are very simple. You start with a who, what, why, when, where questions. Always start out simple, and then you begin to layer these. All right, I'm going to see if you can find the answers. When was this country founded? Can someone volunteer to read that phrase? When was this country founded? Okay, you two. I know you know. What? Could you read that for us? When was this country founded?
Where in this passage do we find that answer?
Right in that first paragraph. Could you? Very good. 7 years ago. Now, students don't really know what 4 is yet, but they see years ago. 7 years ago. They can pick that out. Where was it founded? On this continent. Okay. By whom was it founded?
Our fathers.
Our fathers. Great. How was it founded? Conceived in liberty. If a student said in liberty, that would be okay. All right. What was this new nation about, or why was it founded?
So that all men are created.
All men are created equal. students who are challenged in reading can do this. They can go back into the text and find some of these simpler text-based questions. Okay? Now we'll begin to kind of layer this and dig into this one passage. So, the discussion will begin with the academic vocabulary. All right? They've got some basis here. They kind of have the gist, answering those who, what, why, when, where questions. What do you think conceived means? That was one of the academic vocabulary words. What do you think conceived means? And what do you think most 8th or 9th graders, when they hear that word, what are they thinking of? Being born, having a baby. And that discussion takes place. You discuss the academic vocabulary words. So you say, yes, it has to do with being born. It has to do with having a baby. What would conceived in liberty then mean? Something born in liberty. And the phrase before it says, a new nation conceived in liberty. A new nation born in liberty. All right? Now, liberty, I do believe most 8th and 9th graders would understand what liberty has to do with. But if not, that could also be an academic vocabulary word. So a discussion might be, why does liberty have a capital L on it? Why did President Lincoln capitalize liberty? What words are capitalized in the English language? Anybody? Proper nouns, all right? Persons, places, things. He gave liberty a capital L. Why? All right? Maybe to signify its importance. That discussion comes out with the students. Proposition, we'd follow the same piece. Proposition, looking at that word, what do you think? Do you see another word in there? Propose, all right? Proposition, what might that mean? And if they had a knowledge of root and affix, pro means to put forth, pos means to place. All right? So having that knowledge dedicated to the proposition, a proposal, something is being put in place, and that has to do with all men are created equal. All right? So you have that discussion. Word parts. Okay. Then you would ask students to paraphrase in their own words what they think that first paragraph was talking about. And it is recommended that they write their paraphrase down, but it can be just discussed. They can kind of paraphrase it out loud. Paraphrasing is another skill that's very important. All right? And this is just my own paraphrase, all right, based on what I would say after that discussion. This is discussed as a class. They would share their paraphrasing and then have the opportunity to go back, reword things, add things from other people's discussions. Then we begin to layer this a little bit with looking at more deeply what's in this very first phrase. All right? What is 7 years ago? Most students think that it's 4 plus 20. So there you have the discussion. You've got to multiply this. Your background knowledge begins to kick in. 7 years ago. How many years ago is that, math person?
87.
87 years ago. And Abraham Lincoln is giving this address what year? 1863. So what is he referring to? What year? 1776. Students begin, 1776, that's when our country started. They might think of the Constitution, all right? Who might our fathers be? All right, going back into the text, who might they say the fathers were?
George Washington, maybe?
Right, they might say George Washington. Another common response is our forefathers, all right, the group that actually created the Constitution. What is Lincoln saying is significant about this new nation? You can actually go right back into the text. What is he saying is important about this new nation that was started in 1776? All men were created equal. And then, is he saying no one was free and equal before this time? Is that what he is saying? All right, having that discussion going back into the text. And students will have the discussion, well, no, because we had slavery, so not all men were created equal. Still are not created equal at this time. Some discussion on women's rights will evolve from the discussion of just that very first sentence. If you look at the next paragraph, it begins with, now we are engaged. And if you look at the last paragraph, it says, at the end it says, highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So how has Lincoln framed his speech? Where has he started with 1776. He brings his audience to the present 1863 in the middle paragraph, and then at the end he's framing the future of our country, getting into the craft of the author. I'm going to kind of wrap things up. We're not going to have time to go through the rest of this, but I think you begin to get an idea of what it means to force kids back into the text. Looking at words that are repeated, the words like dedicated, devotion, consecrated are repeated 4 and 5 times throughout this text. Now this past summer, David Coleman at the training brought us through the Gettysburg Address, just this as a close reading. It took an hour and a half and we had to stop. We couldn't finish. That's how intense this involves, all right? It involves rereading and discussing the academic vocabulary. What could it mean? Some writing pieces that are recommended with this. Abraham Lincoln wrote 3 different speeches for this day in 1863. Students examine the other 2 versions of this speech and decide why Lincoln chose this version. And this version, one of the reasons is, this version uses the word nation. You never see our country. You never see United States in this version. It's nation, nation, nation. Word choice, why did Lincoln choose that? Another very interesting research project is to find an editorial from a newspaper in the North, an editorial from a newspaper in a border state, and an editorial from a Southern newspaper after Lincoln delivered this address, and compare the points of view, going back into the text to interpret why the South, the editorial interpreted a phrase the way that they did. Where did they find that in that text? Very interesting, very different points of view. And then another key piece is always to summarize as you go. Summarization, very powerful tool. So focusing in on the 4 corners of the text again, the word choice and vocabulary, how the sentences are ordered, past, present, future, okay? How the author develops the ideas. Lincoln started with how the country was founded. All men were created equal. The present, this is why we're at this battlefield right now. We're fighting for that ideal. And then into the future, that this nation will continue where all men are created equal. So close reading, those tier 2 words, given vocabulary, those technical terms, the text-based questions, and the research task, all important. And there's my email address. So as we kind of wrap this up, any final thoughts or comments on this whole process?